You open your banking app. It's the day before payday. Your balance says $47. Not because you lost your job, not because something catastrophic happened. Just another month. And the strangest part? You've been here before. Many times. You know the feeling of that number. You almost expected it. And somewhere in the back of your mind, a quiet voice says, "Why does this keep happening?" Here's what most people assume. They assume it's about discipline, about choices, about not being smart enough with money or not wanting it badly enough. Society has a very clean story for this. If you're living paycheck to paycheck, it's because you're spending too much and saving too little. Simple. Fix it. Move on. If only it were that simple. Because here's what the data actually shows. 78% of American households live paycheck to paycheck or worse. 39% of adults in this country couldn't cover an unexpected $400 expense without borrowing money or selling something. Those are staggering numbers. But what's truly disruptive, what completely breaks the discipline narrative, is this. 60% of Americans earning over $100,000 a year are in the exact same cycle. 6 figures. And still $47 the day before payday. So if income were the real solution, that number wouldn't exist. But it does, which means something else is going on. What's going on is happening inside the brain. Researchers at Harvard and Princeton, Senthil Mullainathan and Eldar Shafir, spent years studying what financial stress actually does to human cognition. And what they found changes the entire conversation. When people with lower incomes were asked to think about a difficult financial problem, something like an unexpected car repair, their performance on unrelated cognitive tests dropped significantly. We're talking about the equivalent of 14 IQ points. 14. That's the difference between performing in the superior range and performing in the below average range on a standard intelligence test. And here's the part that should stop you cold. That drop was larger than what researchers typically see in sleep deprivation studies after 24 hours without sleep. Financial stress, just thinking about a money problem, impairs the brain more than pulling an all-nighter. Not because people are weak, because the brain has a limited amount of what researchers call mental bandwidth. And when that bandwidth gets consumed by financial worry, there's simply less left for everything else. For planning, for resisting impulse, for making the long-term calculations that breaking the cycle actually requires. The very thinking you need to escape the trap is the thinking the trap takes from you. And then there's what happens on payday itself. Researchers analyzed 24 million banking observations and found something remarkably consistent. Spending spikes immediately after a paycheck arrives. Not just among people who are barely making it, among people who had perfectly sufficient liquid assets to smooth their spending across the month. The spike happened anyway. Behavioral economists call this the payday surge, and it's driven by something called present bias, the brain's deep tendency to treat immediate rewards as more real, more valuable, more urgent than future ones. The relief of spending today feels concrete. The security of saving for next month feels abstract. And so, the brain chooses concrete, every time. It's not irrational. It's actually a very old feature of human cognition, one that made a lot of sense when survival was immediate and uncertain. But it collides badly with a financial system that demands consistent, long-term thinking. Then comes what researchers call lifestyle inflation. As income rises, spending rises to match it, and often faster. And this isn't random. It's driven by specific psychological mechanisms. One is moral licensing, the quiet internal logic that says, "I worked hard, I earned this, I deserve it." A nice dinner, a new phone, a weekend trip. Each of these feels justified after effort. And individually, maybe each one is. But the pattern of continuously licensing spending after earning creates a ceiling. No matter how much comes in, the standard of living absorbs it. Another driver is anchoring bias. Once you're used to a certain way of living, that becomes your internal reference point. The brain doesn't compare your spending to your savings goal, it compares it to last month. And last month already had the restaurant habit, the subscription stack, the occasional impulse buy. Oh, so every raise gets quietly swallowed before it ever reaches a savings account. But here's where the story gets more complex and more honest. Because not everyone in this cycle is there for the same reason. Some people are structurally trapped. Wages in this country have not kept pace with housing costs, healthcare, childcare, or education for decades. For millions of Americans, the math is simply broken regardless of behavior. Some are cognitively trapped, bandwidth depleted by chronic stress, leaving them less able to plan, resist impulse, or access the long-term thinking that change requires. And some are emotionally trapped, using spending not as recklessness, but as regulation, as relief, as the one moment in a hard week where something feels like a reward. The cycle looks identical from the outside. The root is different for every person inside it. That distinction matters, not to excuse anything, but to understand what actually needs to change. And that brings us to the layer most conversations about this topic completely miss. The relationship between financial stress and mental health is not one-directional. It runs both ways, and it creates one of the most self-sealing traps in human psychology. Research published in Science found that financial hardship significantly increases the risk of depression and anxiety. The American Psychological Association's data shows that people experiencing financial stress are more than twice as likely to develop clinical depression. But here's the mechanism that makes this so hard to escape. Depression and anxiety don't just make you feel bad. They distort memory, fragment attention, and impair judgment. The exact cognitive tools you would need to make better financial decisions. So financial pressure creates mental health strain. Mental health strain reduces the cognitive capacity needed to relieve financial pressure, and the cycle continues. Not because of failure, because of a loop that feeds itself. And this loop can persist even when income improves, because the mental patterns formed under scarcity don't automatically dissolve when the bank balance changes. There's a study that captures this perfectly. Researchers followed farmers in India across their harvest cycle, the same individuals, tested at different points in the year. Before harvest, when money was tight, cognitive performance was significantly lower. After harvest, when the same people had income, performance rose substantially. Same brain, same person. Dramatically different cognitive capacity depending on financial context. This is not about intelligence. It's not about character. It's about what financial stress does to bandwidth, and the fact that bandwidth is not fixed. It responds to conditions. So what does any of this mean in practice? It means the standard advice, budget better, spend less, just be more disciplined, is not wrong, but it's incomplete in a way that makes it almost useless for the people who need it most. Because it asks people to use the exact cognitive resources that financial stress has already depleted. The behavioral science points somewhere different. Automation matters more than willpower. If savings are transferred before the money ever lands in a checking account, the present-biased brain never gets to weigh in. Friction works better than restriction. Adding small barriers to impulse spending gives the rational mind a few extra seconds to intervene. Mental accounting, a concept developed by economist Richard Thaler, shows that naming money, emergency fund, car fund, opportunity fund, changes how the brain relates to it, even when it's all in the same account. And perhaps most importantly, treating mental health as a financial strategy, not a separate concern. Because the research is clear, when depression and anxiety decrease, economic decision-making improves. The two are not separate problems. They're the same problem wearing different faces. The paycheck to paycheck cycle is not, at its core, a story about people who don't care about their future. It's a story about a human brain, built for immediate survival, colliding with a modern financial system that demands consistent, long-term thinking, inside an economic environment where the margin for error has never been thinner. Understanding that doesn't make the problem disappear, but it changes where you look for the solution. Not inward with shame, not outward with blame, but at the actual mechanics of how a stressed brain makes decisions, and what, practically, can reduce that load enough for things to begin shifting. If this video put into words something you felt but couldn't quite explain, about yourself, about someone you know, about how the cycle just keeps going no matter what, leave a comment below. And if you want to keep understanding human behavior at this level, subscribe. There's a lot more where this came from.